It was a Wednesday evening at Bellini's, one of Washington, D.C.'s most exclusive Italian restaurants. The kind of place where reservation wait lists stretch months long, and even then, having the right name was often more important than having patience. The soft amber lighting cast dramatic shadows across white tablecloths, while the gentle notes of a live piano player floated through the air, competing with the hushed conversations of political power brokers, tech moguls, and the occasional celebrity. Ryan Miller, Bellini's newest server, had been working there for just 3 weeks. At 27, with a political science degree and mounting student debt, he'd taken the job as a temporary measure while applying for positions on Capitol Hill. What Ryan lacked in fine dining experience, he made up for in ambition and political knowledge. Each night, he'd mentally catalog the faces of senators, representatives, and media personalities who frequented Bellini's, hoping to make connections that might advance his real career. Table 7 just arrived, Sophie, the veteran hostess, informed Ryan as she breezed past. Solo diner, requested the corner booth. Ryan glanced toward table 7, where a man in his late 30s sat alone. Nothing about him immediately stood out. Medium build, dressed in a simple navy button-down shirt and khakis, rather than the tailored suits that dominated the restaurant. His appearance was neat but unremarkable. In Ryan's mental hierarchy of Bellini's clientele, this guest registered as a middle manager at best, perhaps someone's assistant. Just one tonight? Maria, the senior server with 15 years at Bellini's, asked as she prepared a tray of cocktails for a group of tech executives. Yeah, Ryan replied, straightening his bow tie with a hint of disappointment. Doesn't look like much. Probably wandered in, not realizing the prices. Maria glanced over at table 7, her eyes narrowing slightly. Something in her expression shifted, but Ryan was already turning away, missing her moment of recognition. Ryan, wait! Maria started, but was interrupted by the bartender calling for her signature on a wine order. Ryan approached table 7 with the practiced smile he reserved for guests he deemed unimportant. The man was looking down at his phone, seemingly absorbed in reading something. Good evening, sir, Ryan greeted with barely concealed indifference. Welcome to Bellini's. The man looked up, his expression unreadable but attentive. Thank you, he replied simply. Are you familiar with our menu? Ryan asked, not bothering to introduce himself or offer the customary welcome speech he saved for guests he recognized. Not particularly, the man replied, his Midwestern accent subtle but detectable. Ryan handed him the menu without the usual flourish. I'll give you a moment to look it over. Our wines start at $120 a bottle. The chef's tasting menu is $300 per person. He emphasized the prices slightly, a practiced technique to warn guests who might not belong. Thank you, the man said again, seemingly unbothered by the prices or Ryan's tone. Ryan walked away, already mentally dismissing table 7 as a low-priority guest. At the service station, Maria approached him again. Who's at 7? She asked casually, though something in her tone suggested the question wasn't as casual as it seemed. Nobody important, Ryan replied, arranging water glasses on a tray. Out of towner, probably. Doesn't even have a reservation from what Sophie told me. Maria's eyebrows rose. Sophie said that? Well, no, but he's alone in a corner booth on a Wednesday. Must have been a last-minute fill-in. Maria glanced over at the table again. Ryan, you should... But Ryan was already moving toward a table of recognizable news anchors who had just been seated in his section, his face transformed into a mask of eager attentiveness. These were the connections that mattered. 15 minutes passed before Ryan returned to table 7. The man had closed his menu and sat waiting patiently, observing the restaurant with quiet interest. Have you decided? Ryan asked, not bothering to remove his pen from behind his ear. Yes, the man replied. I'll just have the spaghetti pomodoro and a glass of water, please. Ryan couldn't hide his flash of disappointment. The pomodoro was the least expensive main course on the menu, a simple dish of pasta with tomato sauce that the chef kept on the menu primarily for unadventurous diners. Just the pasta? Ryan confirmed, making no effort to suggest an appetizer, wine pairing, or side dish as he would for other guests. Just the pasta, the man nodded, handing back the menu. And water is fine. Right away, Ryan replied with a thin smile, taking the menu and walking away before the conversation could continue. At the service station, he punched in the order with more force than necessary. "Table 7 giving you trouble?" asked Derek, another server who was arranging a dessert tray. "Just some guy ordering the cheapest thing on the menu and water," Ryan muttered. "Taking up my best corner booth." Derek shrugged. "Could be worse. At least he's not demanding." "True," Ryan conceded. "But that booth could seat 4 VIPs. I'm losing money having him there." Across the restaurant, the door opened to admit a group of loud, immediately recognizable tech billionaires, their security detail hovering discreetly nearby. The entire staff snapped to attention, including Ryan, who immediately began plotting how he might swap sections with another server to get their table. Meanwhile, at table 7, the man sat quietly, occasionally checking his phone and observing the restaurant's dynamics with practiced patience. When Ryan returned with the water, he set it down without a word and turned to leave immediately. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. Ryan turned back reluctantly. "Yes, sir? Could I get some bread, please?" Ryan's smile tightened. "Of course, sir, though I should mention our artisanal bread service is an additional $18. This was a lie, bread was complimentary, but Ryan had developed a habit of discouraging certain guests from lingering too long. The man looked at him for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he replied, "That's fine." Ryan nodded and walked away, not bothering to inform the man that the bread would be brought by a food runner, nor apologizing for the wait he'd already experienced. At the server station, Maria was organizing wine glasses when Ryan approached. "Did you just charge table 7 for bread?" she asked incredulously, having overheard the exchange. Ryan shrugged. "He won't know the difference." Maria's expression hardened. "Ryan, do you have any idea who that is?" "Some out-of-towner who wandered in without a reservation," Ryan replied dismissively. Maria stared at him, seemingly weighing her options, before sighing. "Your section, your business, but you might want to Google JD Vance when you get a chance." "Who?" Ryan asked, the name registering vaguely in his memory, but not enough to place it. "Table 7, Maria said pointedly. JD Vance, Vice President of the United States." Ryan froze, his hand halfway to grabbing a water pitcher. "What? No way. The VP wouldn't be alone. He'd have security, staff. His detail is by the door and outside. 2 of them are posing as diners at table 12, Maria explained. He comes in sometimes when he wants a quiet meal. Owner's an old friend of his, apparently." Ryan felt the blood drain from his face as he looked back at table 7. Now that Maria mentioned it, there was something familiar about the man's face, though in person, without the context of news footage or official photos, he'd completely failed to recognize one of the most powerful people in the country. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ryan hissed, panic rising in his throat. "I tried twice," Maria replied coolly, "but you were too busy chasing after those news anchors to listen." Ryan swallowed hard. "What should I do?" "Your job," Maria said simply, "and maybe stop charging him for complimentary bread." Ryan stood frozen at the service station, the implications of his behavior toward the vice president washing over him in waves of horror. Every dismissive comment, every moment of poor service played back in his mind like a nightmarish highlight reel. "Oh God," he muttered, gripping the edge of the counter. "I'm fired. I'm beyond fired. I'm never working in this city again." Derek, who had overheard the conversation, peered over at table 7. "That's really him? Huh. He looks so normal." "That's the problem," Ryan whispered frantically. "I treated the vice president like he was nobody." "Well, technically, you're supposed to treat everyone like they're somebody," Maria pointed out, though there was a hint of sympathy in her tone now. "That's kind of the point of fine dining service." Ryan's political science degree suddenly felt like a cruel joke. He'd spent 4 years studying government, dreaming of working in politics, only to insult the vice president while serving him pasta. "My pasta order for table 7 is up," called Antoine, the expediter. Ryan stared at the simple plate of spaghetti pomodoro as if it were a live bomb. The dish that he'd mentally dismissed as cheap and unworthy was now the most important plate of food in his career. "Take it to him," Maria urged, And for God's sake, be professional. Ryan picked up the plate with trembling hands and made his way back to table 7. As he approached, he finally saw what he should have noticed immediately. The subtle security presence, the occasional glances from staff who had recognized the vice president, the quiet deference of nearby diners who were pretending not to notice the political figure in their midst. "Your spaghetti pomodoro, sir," Ryan said, his voice higher than usual as he placed the dish down with exaggerated care. JD Vance looked up and nodded. "Thank you. Can I get you anything else? Perhaps some freshly ground pepper or grated Parmesan?" Ryan offered, overcompensating wildly for his earlier behavior. "Just the bread would be nice," Vance replied mildly. "Of course, right away, sir. The bread is complimentary, by the way. I apologize for the confusion earlier," Ryan stammered, backing away and nearly colliding with another server. Back at the service station, Ryan grabbed the bread basket himself, not trusting a food runner with this critical task. "I can't believe I did this," he muttered to Maria, who was watching him with a mixture of amusement and pity. "He'll probably have me blacklisted from every restaurant in D.C." "Just breathe and do your job," Maria advised. "Most VIPs care more about being treated normally than anything else." Ryan returned to the table, placing the bread basket down with the careful precision of someone disarming an explosive. "Your bread, sir." "Again, I apologize for the confusion." Vance looked up from his pasta, studying Ryan's face for a moment before replying, "No problem at all." Ryan hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to confess his recognition or maintain the pretense. "Is the pasta to your satisfaction, sir?" "It's very good," Vance replied. "Reminds me of my grandmother's cooking, actually. Simple but honest food." The comment, delivered without pretension, made Ryan feel even worse. He'd assumed the vice president would order the most expensive items, make demands, expect special treatment. Instead, he'd ordered a humble pasta dish and connected it to a family memory. "I'm glad to hear that, sir," Ryan managed before retreating again to gather his composure. For the remainder of the meal, Ryan oscillated between avoiding table 7 entirely and checking on it with excessive frequency. Vance ate quietly, occasionally checking his phone, seeming perfectly content with his simple meal and the momentary anonymity it afforded him. When it came time for the check, Ryan presented it with a nervous flourish. "Thank you for dining with us tonight, sir." Vance nodded, taking the leather folder without looking at the amount. He extracted a credit card and placed it inside, handing it back to Ryan. "I hope you enjoyed your experience at Bellini's," Ryan said, the standard farewell line sounding hollow given his earlier behavior. "It was interesting," Vance replied with a small smile that Ryan couldn't quite interpret. When Ryan returned with the receipt, Vance signed it quickly and stood to leave. "Have a good evening," he said, and walked toward the exit, nodding politely to the hostess as he passed. Ryan stood frozen, staring at the leather check folder in his hand, dreading what he might find inside. With trembling fingers, he opened it to see the damage. Inside the check folder, Ryan found the signed receipt with an amount that made his eyes widen. Vance had left a tip larger than the bill itself. But it wasn't just the amount that caught Ryan's attention. It was the note written on the back of the receipt. "Ryan, yes, I knew you recognized me eventually. Don't worry about it. I grew up waiting tables too, at Middletown Pancake House in Ohio. Some nights were tougher than others. The reason I come to places like this alone sometimes is to remind myself where I came from and where I am now. The path between those 2 points isn't just about success. It's about remembering that every person you meet is fighting their own battles. You're clearly ambitious, and I was too at your age. But here's something I wish someone had told me. The way you treat people when you think they can't help you says more about your character than how you act toward those you think can. Your political science degree is showing. I spotted the textbook in your back pocket. If you're interested in actually learning about public service rather than just politics, give my office a call. JD Vance." Below the note was a direct phone number. Ryan sank into the now empty booth, reading the note again and again, his hands shaking. The vice president had known all along, had seen through his sudden change in behavior, had noticed his textbook, which Ryan had indeed been reading during breaks, and had somehow seen through to the core of Ryan's character flaws in a single interaction. But instead of condemnation, the note offered understanding. Instead of punishment, it offered opportunity. Maria approached, concerned by Ryan's pale face. "What is it?" What did he say? Wordlessly, Ryan handed her the note. As she read it, her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. Ryan, she breathed, do you realize what this means? That I'm the world's biggest idiot? Ryan replied, his voice hollow. No, Maria said, handing the note back carefully, as if it were a precious artifact. It means the vice president just offered you a job interview. Ryan stared at the number, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. The man he'd dismissed, insulted, and mistreated hadn't just forgiven him. He'd seen something in Ryan worth salvaging. I don't deserve this, Ryan whispered. No, you don't, Maria agreed bluntly. But that's the point of the note, isn't it? It's not about deserving. It's about learning. By now, other staff members had gathered, having heard fragments of what had transpired. Sophie, the hostess, looked horrified. Derek seemed caught between envy and secondhand embarrassment. What are you going to do? Sophie asked. Ryan carefully folded the note and placed it in his wallet. I'm going to call the number, he said quietly, but first I'm going to finish my shift, and I'm going to treat every single guest like they're the Vice President of the United States. 3 months later, Ryan stood in the echoing marble hallway of the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, straightening his tie as he prepared to enter a meeting. His new ID badge still felt foreign against his chest. Ryan Miller, Special Assistant, Office of the Vice President. The call to the number had indeed led to an interview, but not for the position Ryan had expected. Instead of a typical entry-level role, Vance had placed him in a program that rotated staff through various constituent service departments. The work was unglamorous, handling requests from ordinary citizens who needed help navigating government bureaucracy, but it was real public service, directly impacting people's lives. Miller, we're starting, called a senior staffer, holding the door open. Ryan nodded and entered the conference room, taking his seat at the table. Moments later, the side door opened and Vice President Vance walked in. Everyone stood automatically. Good morning, everyone, Vance said, gesturing for them to sit. His eyes met Ryan's briefly, with a small nod of acknowledgement. As the meeting began, Ryan opened his notebook to take notes. Hidden in the inside cover was the receipt from Bellini's, the note preserved as a daily reminder of how a single interaction had changed the course of his life. The lesson wasn't just about treating important people well. It was about recognizing that you never truly know another person's story, their struggles, or their potential to impact your life. And sometimes the most powerful lessons come from those we least expect to teach us. Bellini's restaurant continued its reign as one of D.C.'s premier dining establishments. Though the staff now had a particular policy, every new hire was thoroughly trained to recognize government officials, not for preferential treatment, but to ensure consistently excellent service for all guests. Maria, still the senior server, had developed a particular training exercise. She would show new hires a photo of JD Vance and ask them to identify him. Those who could were then told the story of Ryan Miller, not as gossip, but as a fundamental lesson in the philosophy of service. In this restaurant, Maria would explain, we don't serve senators, representatives, or even vice presidents. We serve people, each with their own story, their own value, and their own potential to change your life, whether you recognize them or not. As for Ryan Miller, his career in public service was just beginning. The ambition was still there, but it had been transformed, tempered by humility and a new understanding of what truly mattered in both politics and life. And whenever someone asked him how he landed a job in the vice president's office with no prior experience, he would simply smile and say, it's a long story, but it started with a plate of spaghetti and a very generous tip.